All right, live from New York City. It's Saturday night. It's frankly fabulous. It's the Proctor show. Thought it's Saturday night. I should do a show. I didn't want to put I looked around for all these pants. I'm like, it's too hot. I'll just do it. If this felt comfortable, this felt right. But I did set up a nice shot. In spite of the fact that I'm in my underwear. So it's Saturday night. I'd probably do a couple hours. And the reason why I did it earlier. I did like 3 hours. But I didn't get to what I want. One of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to do a reading of the things I've written recently. And I just completely forgot. I got into talking about, of course, height issues and the wars of love. And, this is the same thing that happened at my reading at KGB. There was this whole other thing I wanted to do where I was going to read from my one-year book, and I just completely forgot to do it because I just got into not wanting to let up at all in the moment, and I don't have an outline or a list recently. This is one of the things that I'm wondering if I should bring back, or I didn't really consult it. That's the other thing, is you just get in the moment, and so you just forget the stuff that you plan or the things that you meant to talk about, and you start making points about just totally other stuff, and it becomes about something totally different, but you just feel like you have to follow it, and maybe you're just explaining the same things. I don't even know. Maybe I'm just explaining the same things over and over again. Maybe I'm more output than intake. Maybe I should read more and talk less. But I didn't get to read selections from recent. I just thought that's kind of a fun thing to do on the show. And I also, I wanted to talk about Wallace Shawn. I was listening to this Wallace Shawn. He was on like this American Theater Wing playwriting podcast. And so it got me kind of inspired because Wallace Shawn's pieces are extremely long, kind of home theater, and they're political. I mean, especially since the fever, but even before that, even My Dinner with Andre, you could say, is political and sort of about diagnosing and fixing modern life. But he became like a Marxist, more or less, after the fever. And that's an explicit part of his work, to be honest. He's a comrade. So I wanted to talk about him for a few hours because it feels fitting. And I don't know if maybe I have discussed it, but he lives in the neighborhood somewhere. So I'm really hoping to run into Wallace Shawn. Apparently he lives like on a 6th floor walk up. Couldn't imagine that. Him and Deborah Eisenberg walking up and down stairs all day, like, Jesus. Their lives, they probably never want to leave their apartment. And then also, I don't know, I thought maybe I'd start with this. This was a book, because I want to bring back the book of the day thing. I do it sometimes. Just things to sort of break up the huge, in just shorter portions, shorter segments, things that are sort of segments. Book of the day, you do it for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And then you move on to whatever the sort of main flow or main theme is. And then just little readings. I don't know. I like the immediacy of it. I mean, it is kind of a form of theater. It's a different distillation of the diary. And also, it's like hyperlinks. It's something I can jump off from. So as I go through it, it provides subjects to sort of have organized tangents and organized digressions. And so I can sort of branch off from the footnotes. The poems are like footnotes to the life, which, is this part, or like the invisible part, the part that you can't see, the part I'm trying to transfer through the different verbal. I mean, that's totally a Wallace Shawn thing, just these walls of texts that are, as a theater goer, you're a listener primarily. He's a poet in that sense, and he's a storyteller. I think he's listening to this podcast and just the times I've heard him speak, he's able to distill things down to very simple, almost like a teacher, or like a story, like it's almost like everything is this kind of childlike fairy tale thing, and uh one thing led to another, and there's kind of a sense to it. um and even though he's not being overly intellectual or using huge words, or he kind of simplifies it and makes it friendly. He's super focused on being friendly. um but we'll get more into that. I'll talk expressly about that. I want to get this stuff done at the top of the show. So I went to, there's this place, Left Bank Books. The West Village, is sort of the left bank, or that was one way that they looked at it back, once again, in these kind of times, 100 years ago or whatever, when it was the American Bohemia or whatever. It was the left bank. If you go to Paris, the left bank of the Seine, which is like where Montparnasse is, and it's where that Berkeley Books of Paris was. The left bank traditionally was like, I don't know, one of the fucking Bohemia, whatever. And so this place is Left Bank Books, and I don't know, they are reminiscent vibes, even though it's not. It's kind of, the Hudson is a whole different thing, and the bank, this feel of the bank. I don't know, New York, for all of the fucking like build up, you really can feel the landscape here. I don't know, particularly with the awareness of the history and how it was stolen and how the deal went down, $25 or whatever. I don't know, it's kind of palpable, to be honest. The turf and the kind of under commons, or the under history of it, the natural scape really like that Luc Sante thing. Karmically, it feels present in the history of just the festering crime, disease. That energy feels like that loam. New York it feels swampy, even though it's stone and all these permanent kind of buildings and institutions and artificial things. It feels like you can, I don't know, you can feel the trees that were here, or the long grasses, or the pathways, or something. The river's a part of that. The Hudson, and the mighty thing that it is. So the Left Bank feel is a little different. So anyway, I'm in Left Bank Books. And it's like, I don't know, it's basically a bookstore for rich people. It's cool that it's in the West Village. I don't know how they do that. I think it used to be on Hudson, maybe. There used to be, I think, a Left Bank Books. That was like more of a rare bookstore. This place, it's kind of like Mass, where it like specializes in kind of like 70s, 80s, like Interview Magazine, or like they had these Jodorowsky comics from like where, Argentina or Mexico, I'm not sure, from like the 70s. So they have like, but it's all super priced up, and I don't know, they have some poetry stuff, they have some cool stuff, but it's like collector's items, and it's just like, it's $30, $50, $70, $100, $200. Everything is super marked up. But I was surprised they had a fucking like dollar bin out front, the sale books, which is cool. And I don't know, I'm not sure what the story, who curates that, or what, but it's like an art bookstore. So anyway, I found this book in their dollar. It's called A Lone Bamboo Doesn't Come from Jackson Street. A Lone Bamboo Doesn't Come from Jackson Street. And it's history, poetry, short story, and it's cool. It's like, the cover of it is like bamboo shoots, soy sauce, vegetable oil, salt. What is that? Is that soy sauce, or so, or is that anchovies or something? I'm not sure what that is. Bamboo shoots, I guess. Oh, Lone Bamboo. So they're bamboo shoots. Yeah, there you go. From George Long, who I've never heard mentioned, but it just looked cool. I mean, and then the poems just like totally seemed stylistically just like something I really needed. They're kind of, once again, in this kind of, I don't know, modernist, tall, thin, but they're political. And the poet, uh, George Long, is a Chinese American, I think. Um, am I wrong about that? I might be wrong about that. What does it say? But so just the poems are really excellent. This is from the 70s, I think, what, 78? George Long is a poet, a musician, and an organizer at the Writers' Workshop at the Kearny Street Workshop, which constitutes an Asian American art collective in Chinatown, San Francisco. Yeah. This book presents a deep analytical description of Chinese American reality. The author does not restrict himself to a personal expression of his own experience, but I don't know. It's cool, just the style attracted me. And then, so the fact that it has all this political, like it's expressly political, the middle of the book has all these kind of prose, like essay pieces that are, like it says, histories of his kind of experience, his immigrant experience. Like I said, I had not heard of this writer, but this was happening in San Francisco in the late 70s, and the book itself, the paper and the pages and stuff, like it attracted me as it looked like an interesting, and just the work stylistically, I really admired the technique, but also the content. Memoirs of San Fran to Vancouver and Return, 4/11/75. Before kowtow and feast over your grave, Gung, I tried your trail through US 5 up and up toward Portland to see if there's still salmon bellies for me to taste. There hardly was anything left. That hotel, on the corner, $7.50 a month, was that your crib? Oh, by the way, Gung, I took this nice lady along. And we ate and made love all the way up here. All the way up there. You did that too, eh? But Gung, Portland is pretty sad. Can't find much there. Hardly handfuls left, except maybe a few partners you run with. Say, saw some up Seattle too. When we get old, guess we all look alike. I mean, the cook said, Sali Allah, closey amigo. Until the Manong said, Goy boon lo me, as the cook apologizes, Ui abak. But the low mean didn't give him a flying damn. You know what I mean? And oh yeah, 8 and 8 is almost as much as me, and loved me and loved me. It's okay, isn't it, Gung, us young and all that? But tell me, I know you must gone up to Vancouver, BC. I tell you, I see too muchy. And hooey, they so stinky and mean, red on the head and spots on the face. But the food was good, rivals that of SF Chinatown, and the folks up there spoke the familiar say up waiting for your order of fine provincial food. But I wonder if the family up north, if they ever run off the old ways, they become just like the smelly ones. You know what I mean. Gung, my heart becomes so tender, drooling. And it goes on. I mean, it's one of those things, it's like a letter, right? And it's almost like, this is something I've been thinking about recently, is like prose poems and vice versa. This is something I think that, and it talks about in that Ron Silliman book. A prose poem can be something without lineation, something without a form or a prose form, just paragraphs, but written with poetry, as lyrical, as expansive, or whatever that means. Or it can mean something that has poetic form, lineation, but maybe more of a prose-like content, such as maybe this. I mean, there's poetry, definitely, but it also reads like an epistolary letter, and a sort of, but it's like talking, it's a talking account. So it's happening on those multiple levels. It's colloquial. It's giving voice to that voice and that dialect. And it's using common speech, using common language within a poetic form. These kind of, on the page it looks beautiful. It's a tall, thin. So it's this long poem, travel poem, diary poem, 4/11/75, memoirs of Sanford to Vancouver and return. He's talking about staying in the hotel, US 5, up and up. The road he's on, I don't know, that kind of shit attracts me. The journal quality. So this is, I don't know, it's more than a chapbook. Like, it's definitely a volume, but it's also a kind of a pamphlet in that it's got not only the poems, it has these kind of prose pieces that are histories. And so it's a political, social pamphlet in that regard as well. I don't know. The reason why I wanted to talk about it is because I hadn't heard of this poet. Like I said, I found it on the dollar rack. That's a cool bookstore. It makes sense that they would get something like this. And, I mean, it was $3. It wasn't a dollar, but it's such a cool volume. I just thought, and I do think one of the, not necessarily requirements, but it's kind of a cool part of poetry to discover or talk about or bring light to forgotten poets or overlooked poets. And like I said, I mean, I even Googled this guy and I didn't really see that much, even on Poetry Magazine or anything like that. So I definitely think this is worth revisiting. I think he's still alive, because it's really brilliant. It's an amazing, and it's stylistically, I would say it's avant-garde, and it may have been neglected at the time because he's a Chinese American writer. At the time, maybe that was not what was it. It was more about language poetry or whatever, and so, I don't know. I mean, check it out if you can find it online, or let's bring this poet back, George Long. Let's get some readings going on. Let's get a reissue. We're trying to find lineages. We're trying to, things from the past that managed to exist, even though they weren't appreciated at the time. And I don't know. I gotta say, the reason why I bought it was because I just liked the technique, you might say, or the aesthetic qualities. I mean, I was also curious to see how the poet had incorporated political or that kind of content, especially coming from San Francisco at that time. So I'm also just curious about the historical, how this fits into the scene. I read this grand piano thing, or about language. There's a lot of, to be honest, like, good academic style writing about language poetry, and most of it, to be honest, is on the West Coast. It's like there's a lot, like at fucking Mercer Street, they've got this Barrett Watton, like it's some literary, I think it's Ariel, some literary journal. Like the whole issue is like about discussing like fucking Barrett Watton's work. And like, from every fucking angle, all these different essays and all these different, and it's like, that's amazing. I haven't pulled the trigger on it. I mean, Barrett Watton, I guess, is a huge sexual harasser. So that's probably one reason why they haven't sold it. But it's just weird because I see a lot of, I mean, even now, those writers are they use academia, or some of them do, in a really smart way. Like Bob Perlman, or even what Charles Bernstein's got going on at Penn. But even the West Coast writers, it's just like there's a lot of, I don't know, at least that's primarily the stuff that I've been able to get my hands on in the past few years. The New York school stuff is a little harder to find in a weird way. Especially as far as like telling their own story. there's Inferno and there's some things like that, but the grand piano thing, like I'm not sure there's a comparable thing for New York School where there's some kind of huge, I mean, it's 10 issues or something where every single person involved is like talking about their memories of it and what their relevant digressions or whatever. As far as I know, there aren't really comparable documents that are organized and published at that. Like a lot of the New York School stuff was what, Mimeo, right? And Coffee House Press has brought out a lot of stuff on sort of like a more mainstream or wider distribution, maybe, and sort of brought it forward for, collected it, perfect bound it, official, and then but it's a point being, I don't know, you see a lot, but I don't really hear people discuss language. At least I don't know. I mean, I don't know maybe as many poets or the poets that I'd like to know, but I don't hear language poetry really discussed that much, to be honest. The only event that I feel like really brushed up with it a lot that I was at the Poetry Project was the David Bromage. Like Ron Silliman was at that, which is kind of because he's from San Francisco and he lived in but now he lives in Pennsylvania somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where, but like if you could bring Ron Silliman into New York more, I think his work has value, like aesthetically. There is kind of a divide in a certain way, like on the West Coast, they take that stuff really seriously. And in a certain way, the West Coast does feel like it has almost a supremacy over the East Coast as far as like city lights, the power and the distribution of their avant-garde literature. I mean, even University of California, Berkeley Press, and the writers and whatnot out there. New York doesn't seem to have, it's all things like United Artists or Wafer, what's that, Press Wafer, or Roof Books, which I don't know, it doesn't feel like it has as much market power or something. It's more like a small, highly intelligent or whatever readership. At least as far as publishing coming out of New York, I would say. There, like I said, there are bigger volumes like Coffee House Presses in Minneapolis, and then Wave Books will put out New York writers, but they're out of Seattle. But it's like, I don't know that Ugly Duckling maybe, but Ugly Duckling I feel like doesn't necessarily have wide, or even Song Cave. I don't know. They don't. It doesn't feel like it definitely doesn't feel like it has like the cultural power like of a City Lights or whatever. And then like I don't know, the relevance of the new narrative writers from out there. They even kind of, not, I don't know, it's not a competition, but to get back to the original thing, having an understanding of what's going on out there, that scene. I mean, this writer's from San Francisco, late 70s. It was around the time a lot of this work was being done. The language thing was a little bit before. It was late 70s, kind of through the 70s. And then in, the 80s, to generalize, the new narrative, whatever, thing. And as far as innovative, avant-garde stuff that people are talking about and is at the center of the conversation, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of New York writers too, but I don't know. I feel like in a certain way, the writers here don't get enough respect. Like a lot of the New United Artists writers, a lot of the writers that Lewis Warsh published, even somebody like Patricia Spear Jones, especially, like should have should be touring, should be booked at universities everywhere, should be on TV for Christ's sakes. And yet, most of the poets sort of exist on this very low, kind of in the cognoscenti center's distribution. And I don't know. I suppose there's probably a network of people strewn here and there across the country in various campuses and of a similar sensibility and who are networked in a part of it. There are, you know. But anyway, I wanted to talk about this book today. A Lone Bamboo Doesn't Come from Jackson Street. I don't even know if you can. I mean, I'm sure you can get this online, but it's you know one of those used copies things. And I'm not sure if this poet has a collected or selected. There should be more. That's my point. That's why I'm talking about it. There should be more. And so I'm rediscovering. I'm trying to publicize George Long, Leong. We'll talk more about it. The other thing I wanted to go into, I want to make sure I get to this. This is on my mental set list. Okay, so I'm thinking, I'm not rebranding, but like, okay, so the Don Yorty post, right? It was kind of a social media success in a way that really surprised me. I thought people would look at it like it's just another promo thing, and good God, this guy's talking about himself again. Jesus, he's trying to make this poetry thing happen. But people were really actually supportive of it, and people liked it who I didn't expect to. And comments, I got a lot of comments. It's like, holy shit, really? But it's nice. It's really nice. It's nicely done. The post is nicely done, and like, I did take a little bit of time in a sober frame of mind to make the post, and I shared it across all platforms. And I did it at the right time, I guess. I Googled I Googled after the fact. I heard somewhere, I think, that the best time to post is during the day from like 11 to like 1, because that's when people are taking their breaks at work. And that's the first time they're like checking their stuff at work. So there's a huge refresh at lunch and stuff. And so I was sort of thinking, I didn't want to post it at night, definitely not late at night. I didn't want to post it like 7 p.m. like I might typically do if I didn't really give that much of a shit. I wanted to sort of like, I didn't think people would like it, just like all of my poetry stuff. I thought nobody would like it. I just thought, okay, this is cool. I'm happy to have done this. I want to show people whatever, like it exists. Now, like my frame of mind with everything I do is just like, it's not about outcome or success or popularity. It's just about, hey, I did this, and I am super proud of it. I thought the reading, I haven't watched it, but I definitely did like a tasteful job. I didn't go berserk, and so I think people might see a different side of me. And he really expertly picked the best, and he just presented it. And he was so truthful and so precise about what he said. It was beautiful. It wasn't overly effusive or complimentary, but it was appreciative, and he thought about it. He considered the work. He did have a good perception. You know, he's a poet. He's a highly sensitized, and as an artist, He's a great artist. Like, that's why I was so happy. I learned a lot, to be honest, watching a master. And it was a live stream, definitely. And so the social media post was nice. I mean, I didn't like I said, my relationship with it now is just like, why take it that personally? Who likes it, who doesn't like it? Like, I do want to participate. I'm kind of at a point, especially now that, like, in my life I'm kind of footloose and fancy free, and I don't have to worry about necessarily the close politics of my posts and who likes it and who sees it. I can, I just want to use it again, and it is where the culture's at, to be honest. It's on Instagram. I would say Instagram is probably the number one, especially from like an amateur putting your work forth. I mean, there's things like Netflix or HBO Max, but Instagram, I would say, definitely of all the apps, it's the most like professionalized. And I do think as an artist, you do have some obligation to like make it work. Not that I'm going to like really break through on Instagram or anything, and I don't want to become an addict, but it does give you confidence, I think. I know every time I do a reading or publish something and get compliments and and I do well, I know it gives me fuel for writing. It really inspires me and gives me other ideas I might not otherwise come up with. I'm just more. You're more free. You're less neurotic. You're less in pain. You're less doubting yourself. It's almost like being on mushrooms or something. No, I mean, it's not like that, but I do get a boost to my self-belief. And I've been, I mean, now that I've got time, facility, and I've been blessed with this situation, and I can really do and pursue what I want to. And this was always what I wanted to do. All of this. It's just I had other obligations. Whether it was at the Slooge and getting caught up with a band and a whole group of and that was beautiful. And then being in bands and whatnot, my relationship, also beautiful. But now it's star time. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about, not necessarily rebranding, but like the Frankly Fabulous thing. Like, I don't know. I can use that. I'm thinking more about being like sort of a punk, not like a performance artist, but like do characters and shit. Like a bad NYU theater major. Frankly Fabulous is sort of that. It's sort of like my I stumbled upon this in IRL, not online. I stumbled upon this place, White Columns. It was a gallery. I mean, I guess White Columns was a space on Green Street in Soho where they did tons of performance stuff. There was a poster for this event with like Spalding Gray, Fran Lebowitz. I think there was Taylor Mead on some stuff. So it was kind of an interesting overlap between Joe Brainerd was on a bunch of stuff. There was like a reading with Joe Brainerd and Fran Lebowitz, and like, could you imagine? Like, and I just stumbled upon this, and they have all these like DIY zines and shit that they make. So I'm like, wow, this is, it was just one of those really fortuitous things. But a lot of Bogosian stuff. Eric Bogosian, he was one of the first, to be honest, in high school. One of the first books I remember buying as sort of like a conscientious adult trying to be like an intellectual person. I bought the Essential Bogosian. This book, it's got a big, his face is on the cover, The Essential Bogosian. It's like his monologues. I think talk radio might be in it. But his performance pieces are really punk rock, and they're kind of like almost like sketch comedy characters, like kind of like Dana Carvey almost in a way. But he's just so intense, and they're a lot. They're more kind of graphic, and they're more kind of like there's more levity. Certainly, like Bogosian is like. There's a lot of depth to his writing, and I mean, especially at that time. I mean, I loved talk radio. And it's a play. I mean, I had the DVD of the Oliver Stone movie. But he predominantly does these solo monologue pieces, which I don't know. I'm really excited by that form, and I want to try it. I mean, that's basically what these are, but these are like more of a instant coffee Spalding Gray. His stuff, it's characters, it's written. He does voices and shit. And they're just kind of, they're not like cartoons. They're more like sketches of street people or people he sees on TV. You know, rich people or religion people or rock stars. But he's a little more, there's an intensity to it. And he's punk rock. He was doing this shit at like Danceteria. He had this character, Ricky Paul. I keep seeing all these posters for like Ricky Paul at, you know, Danceteria or whatever. Like I said, White Columns or Mud Club or whatever. And I'm thinking, why don't we do that now? What the fuck? Where's that going on now? Where are there just like people doing like characters in like some really intense, like highly verbose way? I want to go to like a spoken word night that's like people doing that kind of shit. Not a spoken word night, but like a... I like that it be like they make flyers and they're doing a show in some punk club, but it's like Bogosian doing characters. Like, you know, there's all these hardcore bands and shit, or Talking Heads or whoever, and then there's Bogosian doing his thing. I just think that's so awesome. Like, it still happens now, obviously, but I don't know. I want to get in on that. Here's my next idea. I'm getting a little off course, but I want to go on tour in New York. A tour within New York. I want to publicize it as such because all these people are going on tour now. And I saw some theater company, I think it was La Mame or somebody was doing this. They were doing like a tour, or no, it was Theater for a New City. It was like summer 2021 tour. And it was all places in New York. And like they're doing a place in the, like, and it's all parks. It's all out because it's outdoor theater shit. So I thought, why don't I fucking do this? I want to do a tour. So like, I'm going to get a portable PA. And I'm just going to take it to various parks in New York. And so I'll publicize it. Hey, here's my tour. You know, I'll do the Bronx. I'll do Uptown. Maybe I'll do a show in Morningside Heights. Central Park, maybe. Of course, Bleecker Park. Maybe Washington Square Park. Tompkins. Zuccotti. Maybe one downtown. Where else? I mean, New York Poetry Festival, that can be part of the tour. Prospect Park, of course. You know, I can do McCarran, maybe McGolrick. And I can book people. You know, I can have people, maybe I'll do joint shows if somebody wants to come out and do. Because it's just outdoors. It's just in different parks. So that's look for that. The Frankly Fabulous 2021 tour. I mean, Frankly Fabulous is such a useful character, but I'm trying to not necessarily rebrand, but like I said, the Don Yorty thing, it was all Matt Proctor. It's all Matt Proctor reads from City Life, and my name's on the book. And I wanted it to be sort of a denuded reading. In fact, that was kind of my performance, actually. Typically, my performance is like, oh, I'm performing, and I'm doing things to, like, make the reading. Well, partially it was the saxophone pushed it further, because that was just, you had to get around it and over it and compete with, or not compete with it, but it's just loud. So it's like, whoa. You can't just stand there and read. I mean, you could. Didn't work for me, though. I got loud. We liked screaming and ranting together. That was part of it. We would harmonize with our rage at the death of the world. And but now that I'm doing so, like at KGB, I don't know, when I put the suit on and when I Frankly Fabulous it up, I brought a lot of that rock and roll. I mean, it was weird how it brought out the holy smokes attitude and everything that I developed. Like I literally, the character just kind of came. It wasn't necessarily the intention or that I should have had. The intention that I should have had. The Frankly Fabulous character doesn't really need to be a character. Like I can wear a suit or whatever. I don't necessarily have to go overboard though, and I don't have to like scream and be. There was like a super. Anyway, I've talked about it. So I think this is my main point, is that as an artist, and this is something the Wallace Shawn kind of brought up. As an artist, I think one of the greatest achievements, maybe I don't know if this is particular to dramatists or what. Maybe paint, I don't know, not necessarily. I think as an artist, one of the most significant achievements you have is to have your name become like an appellation or an adjective, a descriptive term in the culture. Just sort of organic, like Beckett, for instance. Like for something to be, what is it, Beckettian? What's the adjectivization of Beckett? But people, this is, that things are like, they're Beckettian, or they're, I mean, within our lifetimes, like Seinfeldian. Like Seinfeld has such a vibe that things will happen in life and it'll be like, oh, that's Seinfeldian. Because that was such a particular point of view, particular kind of like stream of consciousness. And I mean, I think as storytellers, or as, I don't know, maybe even as artists or dramatists or observational, I don't know, he's sort of like, he's got he bends reality to his kind of comedic sense of things. His view of how the forces work and how fate works and how he sees the people in his life adds up to this like Seinfeldian, or Lynch. David Lynch is another example. David Lynchian. Something that feels like Twin Peaks, or it's got a Lynchian vibe. We all kind of know what that, I think. So like, as an artist, I think you want to become something that people can be like, oh, that's Lynchian. So with me, I want people, I think I want people to be like, oh, that's Proctor. Well, I was thinking about Seinfeld, like the fact that it's called Seinfeld. And it has this, the music and just the vibe of it is so. And so I think Proctor, I don't know, I have kind of a weirdness and a skewed, anyway, this is me being naked about my goals as an artist and human being. I want to be so effective as an artist, to have such a powerful mise en scène that people go, oh, that is like Proctorian. What a Proctorian moment. Wow, this feels like an episode of Proctor. This feels like the Proctor show. This feels like Proctor. I don't know. I think I could get there. I think I have a vibe. My writing. Oh, that's like Proctor vibe. Like, I think with the blog post, John Yorty really understood what was going on in my writing. I think he really, the fact that he called it Matt Proctor's diary, like he really got it. And the fact that he said they were little axiom-like poems, I'm like, how helpful, what a great, how have I never thought of that word before? Absolutely they are. It just helped me so much to see it through his eyes, to have that reading. He writes Matt Proctor's diary, little axiom-like, and then the passages he chose were very expertly chosen. He wasn't being disingenuous. He liked certain things, maybe more than others. But I think that's also a poetry thing, too, to just take time with it. You kind of realize maybe not everything's your cup of tea, but if a few things, that's kind of how I structure all my books, because I forget what it was, maybe it was that biography of the young Ashbery that came out a few years ago. And it was sort of about his first book, Some Trees, which is kind of anchored by a few poems which are kind of exceptionally good, of course, but also likable, and they just kind of work immediately. I forget which ones they are, whatever it is in that book. I'm not sure if it's been a while since I've looked at it, but Sur La Table, I'm not sure if that's one of them. Little J and A Prospect of Flowers, is that in the first book or is that the second book? Some of them are in the second. Like Divine Sepulchre, that's in the second book, I think. But the point is, Auden, when he was choosing the younger poets thing, that's why he picked it. He didn't know what the fuck was going on in the other poems. I don't even think he necessarily cared for the book that much. I think that the famous thing is it was like between Ashbery and Frank O'Hara's first manuscripts. And, that gives you some sense like, wow, these guys were really like the top of their game. But there was some sense they just like, they were like the last, they weren't going to pick anybody. They didn't love these manuscripts. It was just like, well, this is what we have to work with, this weird shit. So pick one. And Auden, I think, liked, there were a few poems in it. Like I said, maybe J.A. and The Prospect of Flowers. I could get the book and look it up real quick. Let me look it up. So this is the first book, Some Trees. I wanted to call Wavetable Some Trees. I thought that would have been a good band name, Some Trees. But okay, the instruction manual. That's one of them. The instruction manual, I think, is the poem that everybody actually likes. I think that's the one that probably made Auden give him the award, because it's kind of emotional. Everybody remembers it. It's very anthologized. Yeah, okay. Then Picture of Little J.A. and A Prospect of Flowers, which I don't even think is that long. It's okay. The instruction manual is like a long, sustained thing where it's just kind of like a bravura. Some Trees, I think that's one of them. Which another one, like, is not necessarily that long, I don't think. Some Trees is like kind of a slight poem even. But there's something about it that, like, even though you're not... you're sure that... And then, yeah, Le Livre sur la Table. Like, I kind of mentioned that. That's the other one. So there's... The point of this biography was those four poems were sort of, like, so good and so sort of undeniably good. Even though the other pieces are kind of more... I don't know, trying out forms, or they're also good, of course, but they're not necessarily like these like classic, heavily anthologized. Should I change the angle? Pieces like maybe those are, and so I don't know. The point being, not to compare, but when I structure my pamphlets, especially, not that, of course, they're not that, but at my own level and my own efforts, if I have a few pieces in there that I feel like are really solid, like, for instance, in this one, the Chelsea Girls poem, I know that that's, like, probably the best piece of writing that I typed up, and that's something that might be publishable, and sort of most people that read it are kind of be like, oh, wow, this is good, So I put it right in the center of the book. And there's a few other things in there that Don Yorty basically found them. But that's not to say the other stuff doesn't have value. There's different experiments. There's different, like I did realize the one piece, the oral novel piece, that's kind of a theater piece, actually, in a way. It being a transcription and being a monologue, not unlike the Wallace Shawn pieces that I'm going to talk about. See, this is just the intro to the show. I haven't even gotten into this shit. Maybe I should start reading. So, like, I I did want to talk about the blog post a little bit though, and just update, because it was kind of a thing, and yeah, of course, it coming and sort of being a legitimate thing, and it is cool. I'm super proud of it, and to be honest, it is like in my worldview, it's like a unique distinction. Like, to actually be a part of something real like that, that's the coolest thing that I could be involved in, to be honest, because it's inside, and it's real. Like, he's been doing this, and he's been around, and he's known everybody, and he's a serious artist, and I don't know, the way, and a model for living, as far as bohemian and somebody who really did it. And so that's meaningful, and that is, and it just happened organically, you know. So yeah, with my book, it's like, you include, I mean, it's also just about the overarching thing. Like, I did want to show the whole season, and it is a diary. So partially the book itself is one long poem where, like, you're moving through that time, all that weather, those conditions of light, day, night, those months, the nature, the leaves, the flowers, the events, the actual pieces. And I'm making a movie about it. This is my They All Laughed. This is my Bogdanovich, whirl of life, mental notation documentary, and pedestrian. And so, I don't know, it's the first, I think the reason why the big reason why people liked it is because they liked the cover, which, to be fair, I drew. So I'm not like, it's I think people will like my drawings way more than like my poetry, to be honest. But the point being, they're kind of the same. They're all I don't know, looking at the same things, thinking about the same things, trying to portray the same things. Part of this book and part of my work recently, I want to be Jules Pfeiffer. I want to be the downtown dialogue reporter. You know, because you just hear such interesting things. You overhear such interesting dialogue all the time. So I want to catch that. I want to put that in there. Scenes from the street, the life of the streets, city life, like I say. Is it arrogant of me to call a book City Life, even though I've only been back for 3 months? What the fuck do you know about city life? But, so, to have the cornerstone pieces, like the Chelsea Girls piece, or I'm not sure. I mean, the end of the book is meant to be a sequence, like, to be a calendar, one long poem, really. Even though it's all these shorter poems, it's really meant to be like a long poem. And to be read contra the other long poem, which is the Cafe Life, which is a long piece. I mean, that's part of the reason why I included it, because it's just like, I rarely include pieces of that size, and I rarely type up things of that size, and a lot of my work is very small. These kind of like jottings and three 2-line stands, you know, if that, and a title, maybe even a title in just 2 lines or something. And so I want to have pieces of all different sizes, and it's once again one of these kind of Wayland mind wavelength transcriptions, just brain radio. But it's also a collage of, I've talked about it, the psychogeography of the history of the neighborhood. And so that's, I mean, it's not totally successful as a piece necessarily, but it's interesting, and it's interesting to have something it's interesting to have it in there. So you have the foundational pieces that people like, that are maybe your most successful things that hold together. But then you have the other near misses. uh, I could go on about it endlessly. 621. I think I may have read this one. 621 book report. Burning the candle at one end. See, that's 2 lines in. That's the whole day. That's all I wrote that day. My poetics. 622. Super atrocity. I forget where I read that. Maybe online, maybe there was some fucking... What was that? It was like more of a nonfiction thing I was reading. Super atrocity. Third Avenue poem. That's another title. A lot of times I'll have like double stacked titles. So it's like a cheeseburger. It's like a double cheeseburger of titles. It's twice as good. People should love that. It's more meat. It's more value. More pounds per square inch. So that's a double stack title. Super atrocity. And then I wanted to, that was just the next thing I thought of. It just happened to be a title. So I wrote it after it. But I want to have a poem called Third Avenue Poem. I thought it was a good title. Third Avenue Poem. But instead it became the unacknowledged subtitle. I didn't do a super atrocity or Third Avenue Poem. It's super atrocity. Boom, first line, Third Avenue Poem. Tilting Gardens. I met this beach, Nicorette gum. We shall assassinate the cities, lock, stock, and 2 smoking barrels. 623. Difficult comforts. I watched the sun rise downward like it was falling out of the sky. Raptor Capital kicked me off their property. Fishy idea. Dry humping doom hedonists. They can't take that away from me. Speculative farewell, op-ed panacea, the hard way, swift. Girl who looked like her, hardtack total package, aging creative directors. I knew I was supposed to wake up, allying under pressure with the Tooth Fairy. Hysterectomy Atlas. Hasselhoff signs the loading dock. Huge portions of New York, our third Mel Gibson, shall pass out noted suburban from our weakness. If I were president, I'd know what restaurant to take you to. This is my work, like you said, just being a person on Earth. Beth doesn't like the word homeless, prefers the term urban camper. Millions induced dysphoria, lost in ghosts. I didn't believe in myself, and it cost me my life. Did I talk about urban camping? Did I talk about Beth, my friend? I feel like I did a thing about 625, 8th Avenue Bound. See, I think that's a great title. 8th Avenue Bound. The poem's not that great. But the title, it's like maybe someday I'm going to write that actual poem, 8th Avenue Bound. But I definitely wanted to get it down. And so that happens a lot of time. Like there's a poem in here called Better Than Nothing. It's like the title's kind of mean. That happens a lot in my work. I'll have these non sequiturs that seem like really like mean and kind of ugly, as if I'm like Better Than Nothing. The poem's about like my family going out to dinner. It's called Better Than Nothing. It's like, well, I just thought the phrase Better Than Nothing was like a good title for a poem, and I wrote that down. And then it just so happened that the next thing I wrote down was this thing that came to me much later in the day, probably, about, oh yeah, remember when we'd go out to dinner and our dad would give him a fake name? So I wrote that. So it's just like, I just accepted the I Ching chance operationness and the autobiographical poetics of these. This is how these things came to me. This is, like I said, the home movie, the student film of my consciousness. This is the diary, and it's fragmented, and it's broken pieces, and it is a micro diary. I did get the term cosmopolitan micro diary. I use that in my posts. So I'm just very happy. I got like over 20 likes. I didn't expect that. I thought nobody would like it. Nobody likes any of my other shit. Nobody came to my fucking show. Now all these people are like being supportive and shit. I don't know. I don't know because it's coming from an outside source. It's some kind of official validation, sort of. And it's just very well done. I mean, to be honest, he did a very good job. His blog looks nice. It's very official looking thing. And I know that it's serious. You know, it's really a great body. It should be archived, to be honest. And there's a lot of people that are great poets that have really great readings on it in interesting settings. So it's like, it should definitely be archived. The video should go on Pin Sound, maybe not, but he's just doing it. He's doing it totally of his own. I don't think he gets any kind of grant money. I'm not sure if he ever has, to be honest. Maybe he has, but I know that he pays for like a Vimeo. I talked about it. He pays for a Vimeo account and he pays for Squarespace or whatever. But that's New York, you know. That's what's cool about it. So these pamphlets, I haven't even made. I think I've made 10 copies of this, and it's got this. And now he acted like it was. He asked me to read from my book. The cover sells it. You know, people want to buy just the cover. Fuck the. You don't have to read it. I could probably get $10 for that, maybe. 625 8th Avenue bound. James Dean was from Indiana. Hart Crane, Ohio. Charles Grodin came from Pittsburgh. Me, I am from Grandview Heights. I shit you not. Chili spaghetti. A trickle of vision. The kids on the playground are sieging the castle. Okay, I do want to talk about chili spaghetti. Did I mention chili spaghetti? The other day, I was watching country music television, whatever the fuck it is. I heart country, whatever. It's the only. I love it. I love it. They have this show. It's probably the worst show I've ever seen. On like anything that was like trying to present itself as actual television. And that's not to say. I mean, the production values. It was a cooking show, of course. And the production values were like super high because that's what HD has done. It's just made everything look professional. That's shot with it, even though like, so it's sort of like the guy's kind of like really like a D minus Guy Fieri. And I don't know, they probably produce it out of, I don't even know. The one guy was from Cincinnati. The guest they had was a blues guitar player from Cincinnati. Blues, quote unquote. Imagine that. But okay, so it's called Cooking with Butter. The host's name is Butter. It's his nickname. And I think he's a country guy. It's like there's this whole country music world that I had no idea even existed. There's all these people that, like, you and I have no idea who they are. Like Lori Morgan, or who was this other guy? There was some other guy that had a video on, and the video is super high production, and the guy's acting like he's fucking Elvis or fucking, Brian Ferry or something. It's like, I have no clue who this guy is. He's not even like Alan Jackson is like insanely famous compared to these people. But they have whole careers, and they're on this country music station. And so this Cooking with Butter show, the guy is not a good host. He's loud, and I understand why they gave him the job, because he's just like super loud, and like he just makes horrible jokes. And I don't know. So the premise is kind of weird, because the idea is they have people on who are not cooks, and they have them cook, like, I guess, their favorite dish or whatever. So this guy who was on, like I said, was a blues guitar player. He played a piece, and it was not blues. It was heavily overdriven guitar, like, bullshit. It just was slide guitar. It kind of sounded like, I don't know, George Thorogood meets like Foghat or something. The lyrics were like just absurd. Gucci, but And it just like couldn't say, I mean, and he's just like this old white guy. He's like 60. It's like, what the fuck? How did this guy get on TV? And so the other thing, he just kept talking about, oh, I can't cook. I can't cook. The dish he was making, being from Cincinnati, was called chili spaghetti. It was a dish his mom made for him, and it was exactly what you might imagine. It was, you boil spaghetti, and instead of sauce, you make chili spaghetti. And Skyline Chili, that's Cincinnati, and just Cincinnati's kind of, that's what their claim to fame. I mean, how disgusting, right? So I don't know. It was just the blues, military, industrial, Republican, opioid access is alive and well, and they're on your basic stations. I think they mentioned Chattanooga. There was something in Chattanooga. They also show this show, who was it, Crook and Chase or something? It's like some talk show from TNN or something. I don't even know. There's a whole, they have their own. It's cool. That's like the Branson culture, I guess. They had this guy who played with Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell said this amazing thing about, or maybe that was something else I was watching. Where the fuck did I hear that thing? Glenn Campbell said a song. It's like painting a picture in the mind. Wichita Lineman. That was about loneliness. Or wandering or something. I don't remember. I could see the magic of Glenn Campbell for a second. And chili spaghetti. How nasty. And the guy kept saying, I don't know how to cook. It's like, why the fuck? This is the dumbest idea for a show. Let's get people on who don't know how to cook. Like if I was on the show, I know how to make two things. I'd make spaghetti too, probably. I can't even make chili spaghetti. What the fuck would I make? I could make, what's the most interesting thing I know how to cook? I'd probably make steak, waffles. Oh my god. It was just such a desecration for the guy to call himself a blues guitar player. It was just overdriven slide guitar bullshit. Hudson Beach. That's my new Washington Beach. Hudson Beach. The left bank. That's where the kids on the playground were sieging the castle. That came before the title. See, the title comes at the top of the page. A lot of things, just whatever's at the top of the page, that becomes the title. Because it's just easier. Even though the kids on the play, so chili spaghetti, this was probably, I mean, first of all, the phrase, I shit you not. What a fucking, what a weird phrase, I shit you not. It's so disgusting, I hate it. This poem about James Dean was from Indiana, Hart Crane, Ohio. Charles Grodin came from Pittsburgh. This was, I think, was important to me growing up. I think it was important to me to be able to identify with people who I could relate to, people who were successful in something I was maybe talented at, who were from where I was from. These were Midwesterners. James Dean's from Indiana, for Christ's sake. From Fairmont. I mean, I've been to his hometown. It is a small, isolated place. In Indiana, which is already a backwards-ass fucking place. That's where James Dean is from. Like Hart Crane's from Ohio. This is a continuously... The way... Also, their relationship to New York. And Charles Grodin, to be honest, I read his book, like I've talked about. It would be so nice if you weren't here. And he talks about growing up, I think in Pittsburgh, like I say. And he was in regional theater in this area. I think he was maybe even a fucking... Who was it was in a summer stock thing I was reading recently in Ohio? They, like, traveled to Ohio for a few years to, like, do some kind of summer stock fucking thing. I don't remember. But anyway, that was important to me. The distance between Columbus, Ohio and New York City seemed so goddamn far. I mean, if I look at the people who I've met in New York and their idea of travel and where their life can operate from, it seemed impossible to even get the 500 miles from Columbus to New York. I mean, it just seemed impossible. Where would I stay? It would just cost way too much money. The gas, the tolls, the wear and tear on your car. Or flying, forget that. Who does that? I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I don't do that. I make $7 an hour. I can't fly anywhere. My rich friend had to take me to New York. 500 miles. Everybody I know here, they're from, their family's from fucking the other side of the world. They're from Australia. They're from Asia. They're from Europe. They're from California, San Francisco. They travel to LA all the time. They go, it's like, the fact that these artists and people I could relate to, performers, were able to grow out of this region, come to New York, and that's how they made it. When you're going, and especially what the meaning of New York was when I first got here, I don't even think that's necessarily a personal thing. I think the city has changed so much. I mean, even when I first got here, that was around the time Patti Smith wrote that article that was just like, don't come here. Move to Detroit. That was like 2010. Patti Smith was saying, forget it. You can't do it here. It's not what it was. Like, by that point, I was already kind of on my way. And, like, I wanted to be here. And to be honest, I don't think she was right. I mean, Manhattan, she's right. But Brooklyn is definitely, from my experience and what I've seen, I mean, over the past years, it's gotten a little more expensive. But it's as tenable place to be like a DIY shoestring artist as anywhere. It's not really that much more expensive than Columbus at this point. Like, that's insane to say, but I think, especially if you're talking about over the last decade, I feel like it has been like, I mean, it's not Manhattan. It's not living on fucking West 4th Street or something. It's a different thing entirely. But it's been a good thing, and you can do it yourself, and you can go to the New York school, even though it's in Brooklyn now. Like I said, it just seemed impossible. It just seems so hard. The fact I've even come this far. I mean, it's been the whole effort of my whole life. I mean, not to say I was trying that hard, but the fact I'm even here right now, it's my life's dream. This is my life's dream completely. Like, maybe I should have been more ambitious or aspired to something. It's cost me a lot. It's cost me a lot of effort. The red carpet has not been rolled out for me in this city. Like, I had to work hard, and it's been slow and gradual. It wasn't like I came here, I met everybody. I mean, I'm 10 years deep or more. I've really been coming here since 2009, 2008. And I'll talk about my Wallace Shawn sightings. I don't know Wally. I don't know Andre. I'm still a fucking loser. I'm still live streaming to nobody on Saturday night. June 26, 2021. New York year 0. So I'm on Hudson Beach, which is honestly the spot. I didn't go out there that much the first few months I was here, because it is like, it's not that bad actually. Crossing over there, it's really not bad. I thought it was worse than it was. And I'm trying to get more vitamin D, and it's summertime. And it's the beach. It's the bank. It's grassy. I've been earthing. I'm trying to, get my bare feet in the grass, so I go to Hudson Beach. And it's cool. I love the river. It's been a big part of my life. Now I'm just like, I've been in New York 10 years plus. Like, holy shit. This is my life. Going to Poet's house, looking at the Hudson River, looking at Weehawken, looking at the W Hotel. I abandoned my family, my homeland, my community for this. To be a fucking nobody. To be a minor, extremely off. What would this be considered? I'm doing a live stream in my apartment. This is off, 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 off to the ninth power. Off, off, off Broadway. I don't know. This is Zoom theater. All the work I do is theater, really. So my life is a performance, is a film, that's what the diary is. It's like the script in reverse. After the fact. These are the diamond bullets that hit us in our third eye. Sunning by the Jane Hotel, where the survivors of the Titanic laid up. Notebooks, scraps, pieces of apps. Happy hour ends in 7 minutes. We closed this day. I can remember doing somersaults with my new self. Brand washing Aesop soap. Elle McPherson has a Warhol in her living room. He just sits there on his computer all day. Full moon over Tompkins. Pier 51 imports. .626 Daily Report. This is today. These are the lines I came up with today. So, this is one reason why I want to do this. The immediacy of it, and just this is publishing. This is as legit a form of publishing as anything. Recording it, audibilizing it. This is as good, or maybe not as good, but it is as legitimate. And I would say it's a peer-to-peer form to publishing it in a pamphlet. And I don't know, it's an experiment. I want the immediacy I want, and the dramatization and the recounting. This prompts it, and it is sort of like a not a cheat book, but like the script supervisor. This is the playwriting. This is the consciousness dramatization. This is the poetry that I collected. Almost like a fucking, I don't know, lepodiatrist or whatever. However you pronounce that word. Or a scientist. When I went out into the field, these were the specimens I retrieved. The word specimens. Specimen days. 626 Daily Report. This is my daily report of today. I have imitation in my heart. Brian Truck looked at my story. Battle of the Gods. We're having a war over social media. A crack of grain in our midst. In other news, today's my day of rest and relaxation. So that brings us up to speed. I literally wrote that right before I did this. And I'll just talk about this. Daily Report, I got that from Daily Fish Reports. There's this amazing thing on my TV, the Daily Fish Report, which is almost like poetry. It looked like poetry because it's like lineated, and it's just text, and there's the classic rock radio, of course, in the background. It's on like the Weather Channel or the Harbor Report channel, and so it's kind of like lines of poetry, and it's all about how good the fishing was. So I was going to call it Daily Fishing Report. And I wonder about fishing because fishing does seem related to poetry. And I've noticed certain guys are like fish. And it's like kind of a peaceful nature thing. It's less violent maybe, or I don't know. I guess it's still violent and murderous. But it's a little bit less of a fucked up thing to do. To some degree, I think, than hunting, right? Not that I even think hunting is like I don't know. It's more the NRA and the culture. I don't like hunting. Don't get me wrong. Like, hunting is shitty. I've never liked hunting. But fishing is like a little bit more genteel. But it's also just kind of a zen. Or like it's a nature and it's a consciousness. It's slow. It's just, there's no noise. You're listening to the stream. I don't know. A lot of Hollywood people, I feel like, do it to get away. Like, I think Christopher Guest is really into fly fishing or something. And Huey Lewis, I think, is really into fishing. But I also just think it's a really natural human activity, like to be a fisherman, It's like, this is one of the oldest fucking jobs in the world. And, I mean, even people, you know, in tribes and shit are fishing. And so, I don't think I'd be into fishing. It's big in Columbus. I knew a lot of people that were into fishing. My old colleague James, he'd go fishing on his days off and shit. He loved goddamn fishing. And then one of the first memories I have of doing poetry stuff in high school, Nick Delphia, who was one of my friends, his dad was a doctor. He lived on Glen Avenue. Glen Avenue was like a little smart. It was smart kids. Nick Delaveris lived on Glen. He was a jazz musician. His mom was a jazz musician. His dad was a doctor. My first girlfriend was a photographer. Smart people on Glen Avenue. And Nick Delphia, he had a kind of a Creeley vibe in retrospect. And to be honest, he was into poetry, and he was kind of like one of my poetry friends. And so every year they do Poetry Coffee House, right, in the high school library. And Nick Delphia read this poem, and I remember it. It was in the school literary magazine about fishing. And it was about, I forget exactly what the fishing thing, but he liked fishing, and that was a part of the poem. And it wasn't like a shitty poem. Like, it was just kind of a funny zen. It was almost like, I don't know, not necessarily like a Gary Snyder thing, but like my conception of what Gary Snyder was when I was like in 8th grade maybe, or 9th grade. Like, and it was like something about his hangover. He had a really nice headache, and he didn't want to ruin it, was like the punchline. But it had kind of a droll, like riding in a car, staring out the window kind of feel to it. And I like that. It felt legitimate, even now. Like, I wonder if Nick Delphia still writes poetry. I think he should. I think a lot of my friends, I think a lot of people, just in general, should write poetry. And there's poetry happening everywhere we go, all around us. People at work talking to each other are poets. People on the street corner talking are poets. Like, there's poetry everywhere. And I do wish, like, Nick Delphia, I think, is a high school teacher. He's married. He's got kids. He lived in Pittsburgh at one point. Now I'm not sure what's going on. But he'd be a good poet if he, like, put out a pamphlet a year or something. And just did little... I think that'd be nice. A lot of my friends are like that. And, like, I don't know. I've always felt like I've grown up in that milieu, even though it wasn't necessarily defined as such. It kind of resembled. That's why I feel so like I slip into this vibe. You know, when I was a kid, I remember my mom had we had the, like, beat walking tour book of New York. I remember reading it in college and reading about, I probably read about the church, and I probably read about a lot of the shit that I, like, am a part of or go by or am aware of now. It was always, like, this copy of Portable Beat Reader. This is my mom's copy. This is one of the first books I remember, like, being super... I mean, it's just a beautiful book. The cover. We've had this literally since, like, the fucking 90s. In fact, this bookmark is from the literary magazine in our high school. Either or. That was a literary magazine that never published me. Once again, bastardized as a writer, feeling like a bastard with no home. Not getting rejected by the high school literary magazine. So that's my daily fishing report. Fishing feels poetic. It feels like haiku to me. And anything where people are, like, going into nature and just... It's like bird watching, kind of, in a way. Stillness. Just looking... It's not loud. It's natural sounds. It's natural. The water, of course. I think that's good. even in the city, I'm trying to be more like a bird watcher, except with metropolitan life and people. Going out to these bars, going to Fiddlesticks, going to Niagara. I'm like a bird watcher, except I'm just watching human behavior. And just appreciating, after a year inside, appreciating the street theater of New York, you know. Brian Truck, since I'm talking about high school shit, Brian Truck was a guy who I think, I don't know if he was in kindergarten at Grandview, but Brian Truck definitely went to Stevenson, I think. And I've been friends with Brian Truck literally since, like, you know, 5 or 6 years. And I just thought, what an incredible name, Brian Truck. And he's just a great guy. I mean, I haven't talked to him in years and years and years, but, like, he won. So in high school, right, at senior year, you do, like, your awards, the yearbook shit, best, most wanted to date, most wanted to. And so my friend Jake, I don't know, he was just trying to fill me with hot air or flatter me or whatever. But he's like, he said I was going to win 3. I think he may have even worked on the yearbook or something. There was some, like, I thought I had some kind of insider knowledge where I was, like, going to win 3 different categories. I was going to win best personality. He told me this. I was going to win most wanted to date. A few people thought. And then I was going to win most likely to be famous. And I ended up just winning most likely to be famous. Now, maybe I did win the other 2 categories and they just gave it to other people because, like, they only wanted me to have 1. I don't know. I probably lost, I guess. In my head, this is what I think, you know. And most wanted to date, Adam Abbott won that, which, like, I don't know. It always kind of went to somebody that was just, it was always kind of a mystery. I don't know. He was definitely a really good-looking guy and cool. He was really cool. Like, Adam Abbott's an awesome dude. He gets the Frankly Fabulous seal of approval. And so that's cool. I didn't really have an issue with that. But I would have liked to win that. And I thought, yeah, I was hot senior year. I came out senior year. That was the peak of my life. I peaked in high school. That's the one year of my life that I was like a teen idol. And then Brian Truck won Best Personality. And, I mean, he had a great personality, to be honest. Brian Truck, he's just, like, full of light. He's, like, laugh, funny, but chill. And so, I don't know. When I post shit to Instagram to my Easy Paradise, it, like, it's, like, irrevocably bound to my Facebook, which is not Easy Paradise. It's my personal thing. So, it's publishing, like, my Easy Paradise Instagram moments I'm talking about. I typically just post, like, kind of poetry, insider shit that I think is interesting. Like this book, I would do a moment of that, the George Long book, or events that I'm doing, I'll do, like, maybe a moment, or I do use it for, like, to publicize events I'm doing, but also just, like, I'll take pictures of the books I've ordered. That's a way of talking about poetry and sort of positing aesthetic, maybe. And I love books, you know. I like taking pictures of them. But so, like, this fucking, I published a moment of the Don Yorty blog, just one. Like, just like a screen cap of my book, and, like, and I didn't put any information because it's my personal thing. So the magazine, it's not really my personal account. The magazine is more like an official. My personal account is different. So to use it to, like, personally promote is not necessarily something I want to do. But so that's why I only posted one little screen cap. And it also, like I said, it posted to my Facebook, which I didn't, because I had the more official post where I, like, typed out shit and was like a status update. So then I had the moment and I had the official post, which, like, was overkill on Facebook. But I will say on Instagram, so it was 35 people looked at it, which is about as many as I ever get on my Easy Paradise account. And Thurston Moore looked at it. So that's the second time Thurston Moore has seen my pamphlet. And I think he's attracted probably to the aesthetic and the design of it. Because it is, you know, it is kind of a throwback to zine and kind of Xerox, Kinko's fucking culture and aesthetic. And DIY. It's hand-drawn. It's black and white. But it's also something I made on my laser printer in 2021. But I more or less, to be honest, and everybody can probably tell, I'm not ripping wholesale, but like this is an homage to United Artists. Absolutely. It's Times New Roman, which is their typeface, and just like the layout and the fact that United Artists were the ones that gave me confidence. Seeing their book covers that were just like kind of hand drawn by like their kids and stuff. I thought, yeah, that's how you should do it. You know, beauty's beauty, and in fact, hand drawn kind of fragile, even like imperfect, is better than minimalist. This was the other thing I wanted to talk about. I finally found a term for this, the advertising aesthetic. All of the apps, all of the fucking, it's all minimalist. I've been referring to it as sans serif. But the color schemes and stuff, and just like, it's all minimalist aesthetic. I think that's kind of like part of the insidious, because it feels woke, and it feels like it's using bisexual lighting and color schemes or whatever. Like I was talking about, that ad I saw earlier that was like the first real co-option of queer culture. That felt like minimalist to some degree. I think Photoshop makes that kind of shit easy, and it's kind of Instagrammable. But God, it's so synthetic and so ugly to me. Not the ad for that, particularly. I'm just talking about that minimalist aesthetic. Like you see it, you started seeing it on the sub, like Brooklinen, it's kind of minimalist, or what's that, Thinks or whatever, that women's underwear, like it's trying to pose like it's super body positive. It's not Victoria's Secret, it's not lingerie, it's not for him, it's for you. It's what you want to wear. And they have kind of a minimalist. A lot of real estate shit. God, was there anything else that I wanted to talk about in my poetry? I think that's it. I have imitation in my heart. I don't know. I won't necessarily say I work that hard at. I mean, I do in my way, of course, and I'm obsessed with poetry, probably to like this solipsistic, inhumane, apathetic, narcissistic, like I've abandoned my family. I have no friends. All in the pursuit and the devotion to poetry. And I feel good and I feel justified, I guess. I'm kidding. I'm exaggerating, of course. But, I mean, look at this. It does feel to some degree like... Let me change the angle because it's just... It's literally just been the same thing the whole fucking time. How about that? That's not too bad, I guess. I guess that's basically about the same. So lighting. And I don't know. My idea of what it is in my head, I guess, when I'm reading a lot of times, especially when I read with people that, like, really are cooking, like reading with Hannah, or, used to be like reading with Olivia, you're like, God damn, like, I'm not even writing poetry. I don't know what the fuck. Like I said, to some degree, a lot of what I do is like a form of theater, but it's okay. So I did want to talk about this Wallace Shawn thing and just Wallace Shawn's work in general. As far as he used the term avant-garde playwriting a few times, which I thought was interesting because his work is not avant-garde theater in the way you see written in a lot of, as far as like performance art or something really in your face, like even Eric Bogosian or something, that kind of punk rock edge. Wallace Shawn is kind of, because maybe perhaps his dad was the editor of the New Yorker, and also just his career as sort of like, I don't know, a lovable actor, character actor, and that's kind of his brand, is just be this kind of cute or cartoonish intellectual. I mean, he's very distinct. His voice, his look, all of it. He's a type, or he's one of those actors that just like he fills in so much. He's so identifiable. He's so distinct. He fills in so much of the information of the character just with who he is. I'm sure he's fun to write for, and I'm sure all these Hollywood people love the prestige that goes with that. His dad being editor of the New Yorker, and I don't know. I mean, so listening to this podcast, he was talking about as a teenager. He said he saw Eugene O'Neill. He said he saw Jason Robards in The Iceman Cometh. I guess that would have been off Broadway maybe. And then he saw, he said he saw the premiere of Endgame at the Cherry Lane Theater when he was like, 14 or something. Because he had an interest in plays. And it's just, part of his point is Pinter is very avant-garde. Once again, Beckett, very avant-garde. And that, Pinter is so published. And so, I mean, you go into any fucking, Half Price Books had so many goddamn Pinter, The Room or The Dumbwaiter. And, like, to be honest, he's right. I mean, I watched, what was the one, Homecoming? What's the one with Ian Holm? Where are the scissors? It's hard to understand, let's say. I mean, it's not avant-garde like Carolee Schneemann or somebody that's like meat naked, dangling. Like downtown New York, you see some pretty fucking like even though he's right, it's true. Like even Eugene O'Neill, that was I had trouble. I didn't ever really got into Eugene O'Neill that much, to be honest, other than Long Day's Journey into Night. That was the only Eugene O'Neill play I ever really even had an appreciation for. I read a few of the other ones. I read, I think, A Moon for the Misbegotten, and I'm vaguely aware of The Iceman Cometh, but it's not produced that much. Certainly not, or at least, Tennessee Williams is avant-garde and got progressively more so, perhaps, in his own way, but he's definitely, like, you can do a lot of his plays. Of course, you can do Glass Menagerie or Streetcar, or, I'm not sure about now in the political landscape, however it is, but they're not, like, Eugene O'Neill's plays, it's like, I don't know, for some reason, because he was looked on as such this, like, titanic, and he's even talked about, like, this book I'm reading, fucking, about the West Village, is like, there's a huge chapter about the Provincetown Players and Eugene O'Neill, and Eugene O'Neill won the fucking Nobel Prize and shit. And, like, a lot of his plays are just like, Jesus Christ, The Iceman Cometh is, 3-4 hours long? It's like, there's certain ones that are like a 9-play cycle, and they're all about, like, sailors or whatever, people at sea, and they just seem miserable. And not, I don't know, like, and avant-garde, to be honest. Maybe that's part of it. But even just like the way they go at material and he was for that time, especially that like the Provincetown Theater Playhouse comes up so much in this book. I mean, everybody in the St. Vincent Millage one, but they all fucking did stuff there, and that was experimental. That was far out stuff for the time. There's some aspect, I think, of Eugene O'Neill that feels traditional, or I mean, especially Long Day's Journey into Night is more or less just kind of like a realistic family drama, even though it's like very emotional and it's not necessarily. I mean, I don't know what the Hairy Ape is about, or Emperor Jones. They do those plays. They are produced. Like, it's not like Eugene O'Neill has totally vanished. They'll do Long Day's Journey every few years on Broadway because actors do want to do it. Because it is I mean, I know for me it was relatable. That character is like a poet. The Jamie character, whatever, the younger. And they're theater people. He's the character in the fucking play's an actor. So it's like, and it's a great American masterpiece or whatever, written by this author that everybody's supposed to love and appreciate, and yet most of Eugene O'Neill's work is like, it's pretty weird, I would say. Maybe Morning Becomes Electra. I don't even know what it's about, to be honest. Like, somebody like Thornton Wilder, on the other hand, like Our Town. How often do they fucking do Our Town? Like, Our Town is still like just a part of our fucking culture growing up. I don't think that there's an equivalent in Eugene O'Neill, maybe. Like, as far as being a huge kind of like respected genius playwright, it's like Eugene O'Neill is like totally always talked about, and yet the writing itself, it's not even like Arthur Miller. Like Arthur Miller, there's Death of a Salesman, there's All My Sons. There's definitely multiple pieces that are classics. You know, every time somebody does, like didn't Denzel do Iceman Cometh? It's something actors want to do, I feel like, because it's like this important. Brian Dennehy, I think he was into Eugene O'Neill shit. Or Jason Robards. Wallace Shawn talks about seeing Jason Robards in a couple Eugene O'Neill things. Which, like, in the 50s, and once again, Beckett, Endgame, I mean, it doesn't look like Wooster Group necessarily, or it does, now, it doesn't feel like experimental theater per se, especially after Living Theater, people writhing around. Like, when I think of avant-garde theater, that's what I think of. I think of Grotowski and poor theater and like some kind of really a 60s, just people naked in the East Village living together and just doing some kind of weird human being tribal wannabe type thing. I don't necessarily picture, I mean, Wallace Shawn's work is, like I said, well, particularly after The Fever, it became, I mean, you see it in Aunt Denna and Lemon. Aunt Denna and Lemon, like a lot of Wallace Shawn's earlier stuff, is a little more disagreeable. Like, especially the early plays are just like what's the one about the hostel where they're all just like fucking each other? Like, it's insane. Like, it just feels like it's not. But that's what's avant-garde about it. I'd like to reread that shit. I mean, even when I read it 10 years ago, I didn't really get it. He has a lot of these kind of long character monologues that are way more exaggerated and kind of like bizarre. Like Designated Mourner is more. So after The Fever, he started to get like more of a social conscience, right? The Fever is kind of explicitly about somebody drops marks on his doorstep, right? Capital or whatever the fuck it is. And it causes him to kind of like wake up and think about his privilege and how people have to suffer so he can live in comfort, and he can't be apathetic about it. It makes him nauseous. He gets the fever. And it's kind of like, it's like, what is that, radical chic? It is a little bit like, I mean, when I was in Columbus and getting a BA in theater, to be honest, the Designated Mourner, like, really did shape my life. In discovering My Dinner with Andre, but they were pop artists. They were able to reach Columbus, and they were able to reach my understanding of art and culture as something that exists on the TV, basically, and in pop media. I mean, Wallace Shawn is sort of appealing in a lot of those ways because, like, right, he has this New Yorker connection. His dad was the editor of the New Yorker, and he's in movies. He's in fucking The Princess Bride and Toy Story. So, like, you've seen him, you know who he is. And so he's got a prestige because of this literary kind of, like, especially, like, I didn't know shit about New York. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. So, like, to me, it's like, oh my God, picturing how glamorous could this be? Like, he grew up in New York, and his dad was the editor of the New Yorker, and he knew all these writers, and he's even kind of mentioned in the fucking dedication of Franny and Zooey. Like, it says something about William Shawn and his kid or something pushing a lima bean or whatever. I don't know, maybe I'm stretching, but point being, especially to somebody like, I didn't know what the fuck, I didn't know what Wooster Group, I still don't, I don't really know that much about performance art or the history of it, or how, I have a vague idea of what Grotowski is, and Wallace Shawn kind of has Grotowski informed because, right, like Andre Gregory knew Grotowski and theoretically studied and knew those techniques. So, but the way that Wallace Shawn did it, right, like doing the fever in people's apartments and doing the Designated Mourner in like this abandoned Wall Street and doing Vanya on 42nd Street, like, that seemed kind of punk rock and ritualistic in a cool way, and like ceremonial and DIY in a way. I could relate to his failure. He talks, I mean, he didn't talk about it in his interview that much, but he has in other things where he mentions about, like, when he first started doing his plays, people hated them. Like, literally the audience would, like, have violently negative reactions. People would start standing up and, like, yelling because they hated it so much. And he would show his plays to people, and just nobody liked him, nobody got him. And he worked as like a Xerox, or I don't know, maybe he exaggerates that, but he does mention that. He has mentioned that he worked as some kind of Xerox guy until he became successful as an actor, which, as far as I know, wasn't until probably 1980 or something. So, like, he was 35, 36, 37 before. So there was some sense for me that, A, it was okay. In fact, maybe it wasn't a bad thing if people hated your work. I mean, that's kind of a justification, I suppose, for being bad, maybe, but, like, I was getting similar reaction, maybe, and my ideas, or what I was trying to do, was just, like, it was okay that people hated it. In fact, maybe it's an indication you're on the right track, or that's avant-garde. That's, if something's new and sort of startlingly unfamiliar, people can react. Ugh. They don't like being confused. They don't like not understanding. They can be really violent about that, If you've caused somebody to lose their sense of, they know what's going on. I do want to eat soon. So we are coming up on 2 hours, so I will wrap it up pretty soon. I mean, I didn't really get to talk about Wallace Shawn. But I've talked about his work, I think, probably at length in other episodes. I wanted to get into the more esoteric. And this is one of the reasons why I'd like to meet him. I mean, the interview was good because the interviewer really just let him talk. And the questions, you could tell, were like succinct, mapped out in advance, and they were not really specific. You could tell they were just kind of what he asked whoever was on the show. Like, what, I think the question was like, when did you first realize you're a playwright, or something like that? Or when did you realize, I don't know. It kind of gave him an easy framework to just kind of like talk about the way that his career developed and his history, including as a child. That's one of the things he talks about. His teacher encouraged him. He was the class clown, but his teacher was like, but you're something else. I want you to write this play about this book. And she gave him a book about Socrates. So he wrote this play and he played Socrates, and I guess it was a huge success. And so from that point on, he was kind of hooked. But of course, he didn't really realize that he actually was going to do that until much, much, much later. Even though as a teenager, like I said, he was going to see fucking Beckett Endgame and shit at Cherry Lane Theater, or Edward Albee plays. I'm sure he saw all that shit, which I don't know. To be honest, in the tradition of maybe like literary with a capital L and like sort of the tweed elbow patch, like all of that shit is avant-garde, sure. Like Edward Albee or Pinter or Beckett, but like it's not avant-garde like fucking Yoko Ono is avant-garde. You know, it's not really getting in there. Like to me, even Wallace Shawn, right? Like, okay, I would say, like, the monologues in his work, that takes after, it's sort of a Spalding Gray thing. I'm not sure. Where did he get that? I think to some degree Spalding Gray, I'm not sure exactly what, like, the deeper lineage of that is, or his own personal. It kind of reminds me of Phil Schaap, honestly, on WKCR. Just the walls and walls and walls of text. And his plays just became that. Like Designated Mourner, there's very few things that are actually scenes. Most of the play is like this. And The Fever, in fact, the whole fucking play is that. It's just a monologue. I mean, there's a character and there's sort of a story, but it's not trying to pretend like we're in a kitchen and we're this is real life. It's like, in fact, it kind of brings you into the drama because it's about the direct address of this character talking about their privilege and how they can't live with it and how they have to change their life because they're politically nauseated and complicit. And I think he was trying to do that to his audience. And I think that's a noble thing. I think he has used his career. I mean, so like The Designated Mourner, right? It's all about them killing smart people and there being kind of a Nazi. I mean, especially during Trump era, it was like, it felt, I mean, right during Bush era, when I was in college, it felt really true because I felt in an environment that was like totally stifled. I mean, plus the ways he talks about poetry. He talks about the readers of poetry in that play. The president read poetry and understood it. So that kind of glamorized it for me. That's when I started to think more about, okay, I should read poetry. I should be a reader of poetry. Wallace Shawn was describing this kind of affluent, but like almost like a Kennedy, like best and brightest, like smart, responsible public servant intellectuals who were massacred by these dumb, brutal fascists, basically. But it is avant-garde in that, like, this is a radical form compared to what was even like a Mamet play, right? Is scenes, it's characters, I wouldn't necessarily say Mamet is avant-garde. maybe in the way the dialogue is like kind of super clipped, but formally he's actually trying to be a traditionalist, really. With Edmund and all of the stuff after that, it felt like he was really trying to like write narratives and stories and shit. Wallace Shawn, it becomes more like this oral. It becomes more like a piece that's just written in like an essay, even though it is a character, and it's like it's sort of like just like the pleasant music of his mentality and his way of describing things, and just like he's funny and smart, and there's a lot of invisible kind of things he's doing to accommodate you maybe as a reader and provide a great experience for you, almost like eating in a restaurant. And he's constantly talking about restaurants. You know, his life is very New York in that it's like a cartoon. It's eating in restaurants. It's going to plays. He lives in the neighborhood. I want to meet him. He said, am I getting off? So did I talk about the designated? So yeah, the monologues. So that's avant-garde, right? The fact that the play is these like, especially when I was in college, that was like, whoa, this is, it's a mix of the two, but like, it's presented as a play. They even did a fucking movie of it with Mike Nichols and shit. It's like Mike Nichols is in this fucking play. It's like 3 hours long. This is like the longest goddamn speech I've ever seen in a fucking play. Like, so it's connected to Hollywood and it's got that kind of glamour and shit. But it's even, I mean, you know, you could say the same thing about My Dinner with Andre. Like, the fact that it's a 2 hour long movie that is heavily just dialogue, and it's got one location, it's two guys talking. That's sort of avant-garde, you might say. It's not commercial. It's kind of a joke. It's kind of a really witty kind of stunt or something. But I think that's part of the magic and the life kind of ritualizing and ceremonial. I mean, they changed their lives with that movie by making it. They made themselves actors. They made themselves sort of famous, iconic. And you could say it's an avant-garde thing because it's certainly an idea that nobody would think would work. I mean, but it's also like working on an audience-friendly commercial. Like, he worked hard on it. It wasn't just some sloppy. And he's kind of, I don't know. He's maybe not an entertainer. He said something about he's a show off because he's the class clown. He has to show off. I could relate to that. And so I think his work, like, well, he said something on the podcast to the effect that like they produced. He said he paid for this stuff with his own money to produce audio versions of The Designated Mourner and Grasses of a Thousand Colors, two of his last plays. Which, you know, to be honest, WNYC already has an audio version of Designated Mourner that I thought was pretty good. I don't know why they redid it, but that's cool they did The Grasses of a Thousand Colors. But he said he did it because he wanted to be in the conversation as sort of like a serious American writer and like just kind of a social, like part of the conversation, you know, like I forget the examples he used, but is he discussed? I think he exists in kind of an interesting way, and that's part of what's fun about him is like he's a pop culture figure. And in fact, I think it's indicative of our age that he's one of the people that's allowed to do this in our country. It says something about our society. He's sort of an aristocrat born into this prestigious literary, I mean, it's the fucking New Yorker. Like, there's the reverence for this magazine, like, and for his, and he grew up, and he's talked about it in just like this kind of enchanted, charmed world. like he fucking says, Chevy Chase was in his goddamn class. um, like these are Manhattan blue bloods. And he's as close as we're going to get in world capital Manhattan to a... He's like a public intellectual. He's sort of maybe somebody like might be famous in France who's like smart, but also, I mean, he's a movie star, so that is what makes him famous. But I would say his plays, I think they're known, and I think they're popular even at this point. Certainly more so than when I was discovering them in college. I mean, I noticed a few years after I graduated, I forget when, probably 2014 or something, when I went back, maybe 2012, 2013, somebody at Ohio State was doing the designated mourner. Some students were putting it on, which that didn't happen when I was an undergrad. There was no interest. I think I found it maybe at Half Price Books, the Samuel French, because he's sort of a famous literary scion. FSG or whatever puts out his books, or theater group, whoever that is, Doubleday or whatever. He's got pretty big distribution for a modern playwright. And I would say his style is distinct. It is kind of a hybrid, like of a Beckett with informed by his sensibility of maybe Lower East Side or Soho avant-garde theater possibilities, and probably opened up and encouraged. But I mean, even his first plays, like, they may have been the most avant-garde of all, like Our Late Night, or I wonder if I have this. I have to, right? Where else would it be? This was the one that I was obsessed with finding and learning about in Columbus, because I never ordered it off the internet. I mean, I probably could have, but when I came to New York and went to, there used to be Shakespeare and Company on Broadway across from Tisch, whatever street that is, Broadway and 4th or whatever, I don't know. And I went in the basement, and they have all the Samuel French, and they had this, the Hotel Play by Wallace Shawn, which, as far as I know, has never really been reproduced or anything. But you would say it's avant-garde, and it's unusual in that it's got, like, 40 characters or something? And the production was kind of famous because it had all these kind of famous people. Griffin Dunn, Elizabeth McGovern, Wendy Wasserstein is in the play. Who else? Christopher Durang, Larry Pine. Wallace Shawn, of course, was in it. Dominique Dunn, Linda Hunt, Mark Lynn Baker, Deborah Eisenberg, of course, and then just a lot more. Just people at the bar. There's like 20, there's 50 people in this fucking play. And how many times did they do it? August 1981. Who knows how many times they even staged this fucking play? But it's just kind of crazy. It's called the Hotel Play, and I'd always heard about it because, like, Wallace Shawn was sort of discussed. I mean, this was another book. It is like an academic type book, Righting Wrongs, the work of Wallace Shawn. It's like, it's a pretty in-depth talking about all his different projects. My Dinner with Andre, The Designated Mourner, like I said, Aunt Dan and Lemon. Even shit that, like, look at this, the Hospital Play. I mean, there's a lot more Wallace Shawn out there than we'll probably get to read. Like these early plays, Four Meals in May or whatever. Will we ever get to see a version of that? Will they ever bring out more of his plays? Like, he's a famously slow worker, and he comes out with a play about once a decade or something. So it's kind of an unusual body of work in that there's really only, like, 6, 7, 8 pieces, really. There's And this hotel play is very obscure. Like, I don't really hear it discussed. And like I said, it is avant-garde because it's just bizarre. Like, this play just, when I read it, it just made no sense to me at all. Literally, it made no fucking sense at all. Maybe if I read it now, I would get more out of it because I'd read it. It's a poem. He's a poet. I think he does it through playwriting and through his sort of like this scheme, like he called it, that he's called out for himself. And I don't think he could do it any other way necessarily. I think he's combined all the things that he likes and the things that felt authentic. But it is almost like, I mean, this play is just, it's almost like Springsteen's early stuff where it's just outrageous. It's all these characters, all these scenes, and like I said, there's 40, 50 fucking people, and it's just like the scenes are brief and they're just bizarre. The dialogue is bizarre. You just have no fucking clue what's going on. And then this one, I mean, Our Late Night, I think anybody might read and be like, this is really funny and poetic and amazing. To be honest, I think it might be his best play. I think it's like, it's poetry and it's abstract in a way. After My Dinner with Andre, his work gets more like he's talking to the audience to some degree. I think Ant, Dan, and Lemon is kind of an interesting combo because it's more presented like, I mean, even though there's this character talking to the audience, first of all, it's a character, and there's like more make-believe. The character's kind of sinister, and what they're involved in is really sinister. I think I remember. It's more of like a play in that sense. It's almost, I guess, maybe like a Brecht thing, maybe. Even though it's like his other work where it's this, the message is like this very intense kind of like medicine, but the character is like very like innocuous and kind of cute and friendly and smart and or it's like overly nice manners and just trying to say everything in just like the nice, quaintest, most pleasant, careful, smart, but Ant, Dan, and Lemon is about what? There's heavy Nazi and it's more of like a suspension of disbelief thing. Like I said, there's characters and his early plays are like that. Whereas after The Fever, I think The Fever was maybe the next thing after that, but it was much later. Ant, Dan, and Lemon was like early 80s. And then The Fever didn't come out to the early 90s. I think he did have kind of a crisis of conscience, or I think he became lucky through becoming a movie star, and so that's what he was doing through the 80s, making money, being on the fucking Cosby Show and shit. And so I think he did maybe feel guilty, and so he started to take these trips to Central America and shit. And that was something he'd always done. Like the hotel play is about, but he developed more of a political conscience, and that's what The Fever's about. The hotel play, he said the best way he could set up, and a lot of his work is about class and labor, but in subtle, audience-friendly ways. He's not explicit about it that often, but it's there. He talks a lot about labor and how, so he would talk about in the 70s, right? He didn't really have enough money to work that often on his writing. So what he would do is he would work and save up a bunch of money from his job, and then he would take a bunch of time off and he'd go to hotels in like the Bahamas and shit, or the Caribbean, I think maybe off season when it was like super cheap, and he could stay for a month, he could stay for 2 months, and so he'd go, and that's when he'd work on his plays or his writing. He'd like go to this other fucking country. And so the hotel play, I think, I'm not sure if it was written there, but it's sort of about those experiences. This is something that was always a part of his traveling. And so you see it in Deborah Eisenberg's work too. Like the 80s, they went to Central America, they saw shit Reagan was doing, and it disturbed them, and it became a big part of their work. In Wallace Shawn, it's like the fever. It's direct address. It's a soliloquy. It's a monologue. And it becomes more the designated mourner. Basically, same thing. There's dramatic, but it's very pointed political message, I would say. Even though it's like doing it in veiled and kind of on the friendliest, it's almost like Disney or something. It does have that, it's appropriate that he would be in these kids' movies because he does have that kind of like fairy tale. I think that our culture needs. We need infantilized, Disney-fied narrative. Everything. It's like When You Wish Upon a Star and shit. Okay, I just want to talk. I mean, I could talk about Wallace Shawn for a whole other. I didn't really get into it toward the end, but I could talk about Wallace Shawn for a fucking. I could do 90 hours. This is one reason why I want to meet him. So I've had interactions with Wallace Shawn over the year. I want to talk more about the work though, because the work was what it was important to me growing up. Even though I've been maybe personally disappointed with not connecting with this person, and like I have seen him in person a number of times over the decade plus that I've lived here, which was, it was, even that was like something I dreamed about or whatever in a pathetic way in Columbus. Because My Dinner with Andre was like it's still my favorite movie, I would say. Like, he's able to bring these highbrow, or I don't know, highbrow for pop art stuff into that space. My Dinner with Andre was a little bit of a cultural, it's a little bit of a cultural, like my household, like people know what it is. The plays, I'm not sure. I think, like I said, the politics, I think people might continually find like that's something that really gives his work a lot of integrity. But I think the early work, I don't know, I'm going to revisit it right after this. I'm going to take another look at some of the early stuff that I really didn't get. The more avant-garde stuff. It's just wild. And it's not really reality-based or understandable like the later stuff is. The later stuff is more like these characters kind of talking to you, and there is a dramatic irony. You sort of understand things about them that they don't think that, there's a subtext. But I think like I said, I think he had to do it that way. I think he wanted to deliver these messages, and he felt confidence. And he, like he said, he never thought he was going to write like some commercial success of a play. I mean, even somebody like Mamet, like he kind of writes them quicker. It's definitely quicker than Wallace Shawn, and like, even though he's obtuse and kind of stubbornly coming at it at his own angle, like, there's still plays and shit. Like, they'll put fucking Pacino on a Broadway in China Girl because it's Mamet and it's a play. Like, Wallace Shawn, will they ever do the Designated Mourner on Broadway? Like, I think at this point, maybe. I think maybe he's, like, his essay collection, that's HarperCollins. He's in Barnes & Noble and shit. Like, people know who the fuck Wallace Shawn is. And his plays are pretty easy to read. I think that's a hallmark of it. Even though it's avant-garde, it's not necessarily difficult. I mean, My Dinner with Andre, or even fucking Designated Mourner, is probably not most people's idea of the ideal movie or night at the theater. Like, theater is what it does in our lives has changed so much. I mean, it was barely over 100 years ago that theater was like the only way to see a reality simulation, like imitation of real life. But then with movies, of course, and then TV and everything we have now, theater just serves a completely different. I mean, first of all, it's not a part of our lives. But it used to be you had to go to the fucking theater to see anything. Like, there was no home anything unless you were doing it or having a friend over or whatever. Like, you had to go to the fucking theater. It's like, now the theater is, it's like poetry, sort of. It's like this institution, MFA, niche, educated, bourgeois, leisure activity, whatever. Or, I don't know, there's some community aspect to it as well. Like, theater is alive. I'm not saying theater is dead. Like, theater is definitely alive. And community theater, I think that's what's cool about it, is like it really does exist everywhere and on these levels. I think that they could do more original material. You know, Designated Mourner was something that when I was in college really didn't really feel, because it was avant-garde. It didn't feel, I mean, when I showed My Dinner with Andre to my friends, my brother he walked out. He made it about 20 minutes and then he was done with it, you know. And so it's avant-garde in that sense, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not like no wave or noise. It's not even, like, I do think, I don't know, like, Wallace Shawn is a, he says it himself. He's very upfront about it, about being a bourgeois and sort of a lucky person. I would say, you know, of the playwrights of the last, let's say since 1970, I would say Wallace Shawn. If you wanted to compare somebody to the playwrights that he was trying to class himself with, such as Beckett or Eugene O'Neill, or like, let's say Strindberg or Ibsen, like the Dream Play, or Chekhov, you know, I think Wallace Shawn's work does have an element of kind of reality. Like My Dinner with Andre is kind of a Chekhov in a way. I think, yeah, I think he's, like I said, I think a lot of what he does, he's like clarifying and simplifying in advance. He's a very smart person. He's been around very smart people his whole life. Literary people, verbose people, articulate people, specific people, people with good vocabularies, and artists, musicians, and let's say highbrow. I mean, not necessarily like, is Wallace Shawn to some degree like him being a clown maybe, or being like, even the New Yorker is not extremely avant-garde. It's relatively academic or establishment, or like, I would say for my own life, the things that the messages I received, let's say, from My Dinner with Andre, from Designated Mourner, from the early plays. I mean, even, like I said, Our Late Night is probably my favorite. I have always wanted to do a production of it. We should have done it at the Slooge. It would have been perfect for that. But it's almost like Springsteen. I hate to make that comparison, but his early stuff is wild and kind of incomprehensible, just effusive. And then it becomes, he simplifies, he clarifies, he becomes politically conscious, and he delivers something to the audience that's like way considerate in advance with how it's going to like escort you through its kind of argument or whatever it's positing. It's doing that in a way that's like invisible, but effective. And so it's avant-garde without being abrasive, or even like, you know, it's not. There's no video stuff. There's no weird movement shit. There's no like writhing on the ground or like weird. It's very comfy. It's almost like living room. It's kind of bourgeois, I suppose. In that, I mean, they're rich guys. This is something that Andre. This is probably one reason why they are best friends, because they are extremely. Their parents were famous rich people and glamorous, and they were around glamorous rich people when they were young. So they're like aristocrats. I mean, like I said, in our culture, for them to... My Dinner with Andre still gets shared on Facebook and shit. The stuff it says about we have a world economy operated by money, like... Everything it was diagnosing about American life, automation, how theater fits into that, the way it glamorized kind of New York, their cafe lifestyle, and their kind of bohemian artist lifestyle, you get a glimpse into it. And it is like sitting in it's like a flanner, it's like sitting in a cafe with your friend and having a conversation. And going to a movie is not a dissimilar experience. So going to a movie theater and having this 2-hour-long My Dinner with Andre, it is almost like having dinner with them. It's almost like we as the audience are having the dinner with Andre. And it feels that way. That's about how long a dinner lasts. And you move through it. It's aware of the theatrical conventions, first act, second act, third act. And it does all that. But it's witty because it does it as a dinner. So it's not Kathy Acker. It's not somebody like mutilating themselves or doing some kind of really cool video or even poetry, to be honest. Like, if you were to say, well, what is the why is Wallace Shawn, how is he different or similar to, like, let's say, like, poetry project artists? Has he ever read there? Is he respected there? Would he fit in? Is his work or, you know, is it seriously, could you consider it seriously as part of something like that? Maybe not that specifically, but he does mention that he saw Wooster Group and the Performance Group and Mabu Mines. I know he has a long history with La Mama, but he did the Paris Review interview with Mark Strand, so I know that he is serious about poetry and has probably read it and been around it his whole life. But Mark Strand is very uptown. Like, I'm not sure if Wallace Shawn, like, what's Wallace Shawn's opinion on Ted Berrigan, for instance? Or is he aware of Eileen Miles? Or, let's say, Bill Berkson. Bill Berkson's somebody who comes from a not totally dissimilar background, maybe. I'd like to hear his opinions on that stuff. You know, I would say, like, is Sam Shepard avant-garde? Like, not really. Sam Shepard became, like, a pretty traditional, at least formally, I'd say. Like, maybe the substance is poetry. And he's a good playwright, certainly. But, I mean, Wallace Shawn is violating the perceived commercial standards. Even Arthur Miller, right? Like, Death of a Salesman does all that shit where it's like in his head or whatever. The set's supposed to be like his head. But it's like, it's still, you can do it in a high school auditorium. Can you do any of Wallace Shawn's plays in a high school? Maybe at like the extremely wealthy, smart kid. Although they've probably moved on. I mean, they've probably... He's still a white guy. He's still an old white guy. And a rich white guy. So, are we really going to want to listen to these mansplanations and these super monologues by these white guys? I mean, his work is very sexual. Grasses of a Thousand Colors, I thought, was kind of interesting because it's kind of a combination of, like, Designated Mourner, Aunt Dan and Lemon in some of his earlier plays. It's got more scenes in it. But it's not, I mean, Designated Mourner is so political, and it's, I don't know, it's funny. I'd say it's accessible, and that's maybe what makes it his, like, magnum opus, let's say. Grasses of a Thousand Colors, I think, had commentary, like, about food and shit that was, like, very insightful and current. But it's also, I don't know, it's a little more like a dream play and sort of like a fairy tale or something in a way that it's a little more hard to pin down. I can see why that play might not be like Designated Mourner, particularly in this political moment and just the political climate since it's been written. It feels like a vital piece of, and to be honest, especially that one. But like I said, The Fever and Aunt Dan and Lemon and My Dinner with Andre, they're all very clear, simplified, intelligent, entertaining, but also highly aesthetically accomplished. Like, I would say Eric Bogosian's work has more of like a raw kind of edge, like a sketch quality. Wallace Shawn's work feels like finished and kind of immaculately composed. His compositional ability is I would say it's considerate to the audience, even though it's avant-garde and challenging. He's not like obscuring or antagonizing. There's no like like a lot of that kind of vibe. You feel hostility. Like Peter Handke has that play. What is it? Attacking the audience, or I forget what it is, but it's something that's like outright hostile to the audience, ignoring the audience. Or Wallace Shawn is like nice. He wants you to have a good time. I saw him at because my play Will was very influenced by that. It's a monologue. It's a wall of text. And it's a dramatic situation told by one character. And it's kind of fatalistic, and it wasn't really political in any way, I wouldn't say. Other than just like the technique or the form. But the actor in the play, Elaine, she would get tickets to stuff from time to time because she worked for public theater. And we went and saw Michael Shannon in some fucking play. I forget what it was. Ionesco. Some fucking Ionesco play in the Polanski Shakespeare Center, which was like not far from my house in Park Slope. What a great life. I could ride my bike down the street to the fucking Polanski Shakespeare Center in Brooklyn, a facility they had just built specifically to do Shakespeare shit. And Michael Shannon was on whatever that is, Boardwalk Empire and shit. And he was a lot of people's favorite kind of good actor. I think he's a Chicago, like, Steppenwolf person. But he lived in Red Hook or something. I'd always hear people telling me they saw Michael Shannon here or there. So we went and saw it, and he was pretty good. It was about fascism. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up to see what play it was. But because Elaine got the tickets, so I'm sitting there, Elaine's sitting here, and I look, and right past Elaine, sitting on the other side, because it's like a stage that sticks out into the theater, whatever the fuck's it called. It's like one of the few things I learned in college. I don't remember. Whatever the fuck that's called. And sitting on the other side is Wallace Shawn, in the intermission, just sitting there. I'm thinking, yeah, this is exactly... We should have went and talked to him. Hey, Wally, we love your fucking work, man. We're doing a play right now that was influenced by it. Here's Elaine. He would have liked her, and then it would have got me in. But we didn't. But I thought it was fortuitous. It's like, she was in this play that was sort of inspired by his work, and there he is. I'm sitting here with her, and right past him, there he is. And I ran into him a few times. He said something on his... I didn't run into him, but I saw him probably, I think, 4 times over the decade at various things. Events that he was at, usually. But the last time... He said something on this podcast about how he liked it. And this is the last thing I'll say. How he liked it. He felt a lot of gratitude when people approached him and told him they liked his work. He said he really appreciated that. And I will say that is not the vibe that I got when I approached him. I did it in the worst possible circumstances. I was on a weed edible. I had this Rice Krispie that I had gotten at Secret Loft. And it was at Brooklyn Book Festival, and I'd seen Wallace Shawn there about a decade before, a long time before. And I thought, if I ever see him again, I'm going to say that I like his work. I think he'll be cool with that. And so I thought, here's my... When's the next time I'm going to see fucking Wallace Shawn? It happens, 3 times every 10 years, so I better shoot my shot. But it was an event for Deborah Eisenberg. She was there to do something, and he just happened to be there. It was on the steps of the courthouse in Brooklyn. So he was probably trying to be low-key and not really, vibe that much. It was almost like... So after the thing, he was, like, going up to... And it was almost like when fucking Jack Ruby, like, went for Oswald. It felt like the same energy as that moment. Like, Wallace Shawn and Deborah Eisenberg was right there. And I went, and I kind of, like, lunged. I didn't really lunge, but I kind of, like... went to stop him, and he had to I went, hey, I really like your, I forget what I said, but I think I said something, hey, I really like your work, and I could just tell he was like, he wasn't reacting well. I was like, am I dealing with Andre? Yeah, okay. And Deborah Eisenberg just shot me like the ugliest. She looked at me, like I said, like I was Jack Ruby and he was Oswald or something. Like, who are these people? How do no manners coming up and assaulting my poor Wally. But anyway, I'm still on the outside looking in. I really admired Wallace Shawn a lot. I mean, that's partially the inspiration for this, clearly. This is just the instant DIY, half-assed, every night version of a Wallace Shawn play where I'm in your apartment, I'm in your living room, I'm doing long auditory listening baths for you politically. I'm trying to activate people politically, trying to wake them up, trying to provide content. And that's what the Designated Mourner is. That's what the Fever is. They're just these basically live streams. They're basically Twitch streams. Except that's, you had to do it like in a theater and shit and take 8 years to write it. I can do it every night. Do it totally off the cuff. I can read my poetry. So I get that good dialogue in there. I don't know. What is the difference between Wallace Shawn and the... I mean, partially, I think he's successful as an actor, so that's what provides him with his lifestyle. But I think even the attention you get as a poet, like to do plays, there's a lot of people focusing on your material. There's all the actors. There's like a premiere. There's audiences that come. You do a run. I mean, especially Wallace Shawn. Like, he's definitely not unknown. I would say he's one of the most famous playwrights in this country at this point, alive. Now, and probably one of the most accomplished now that fucking, August Wilson died, Sam Shepard died. I think he's better than Sam Shepard, really. Like, Sam Shepard kind of wrote plays that needed to be written, and he did it a lot. And they're good. They're great. But they're also conventional, let's say. Wallace Shawn is like pushing at the boundaries. Sam Shepard, I think, did that earlier, maybe. Even, I don't know, a lot of his stuff that's just like crazy poetry stuff, it's like, I never really, maybe I should reread it, but like, even, what's the one, Tooth of the Crime? People are always telling me I should do Tooth of the Crime monologue. Or, even, what's the one, La Turista? I'd have to read it again, but to me, I think Wallace Shawn is probably a better... Sam Shepard is just like playing into... And I guess Wallace Shawn does this to some degree, but he's playing into the conventional things of what a writer's supposed to be, as far as like his masculinity, his short stories and stuff they're like Hemingway type of, or declarative prose. Even his plays were like family dramas. I mean, there's unusual stuff, and he's a poet, definitely. Like, I love Sam Shepard, don't get me wrong. But I think the fact that he fit in with this media kind of preconceived image of, like, cowboy, tall, good-looking, Western, that's not to say he didn't have the talent. I think it's important that Sam Shepard existed, and these plays are important. And it's important he is who he was. But, I mean, I'd say the same thing about Mamet, I think. I don't know. A lot of his stuff is kind of slight, to be honest. And I think he tries to get away with that. Wallace Shawn has put out less work, but I think there's more impact, more he's I don't know, maybe a little more comfortable writing through that avant-garde tradition. Like, there is something about Wallace Shawn that feels a little Gertrude Stein to me. The length of it, maybe, and the spokenness of it, the compositional speech, and the discursiveness of it, and the way it kind of like unspools constantly, like speech does. I don't know. I could go on and on. I gotta eat. It's 1 a.m. Saturday night. Thank you for watching. So I've got 6 hours of new explorations. We'll see how many people want to go with me on this third stream. Thought casting. Wallace Shawn. I hope that the culture has moved to a place where Wallace Shawn can just be like something everybody could enjoy. Like, I think Wallace Shawn should be on fucking HBO Max, his plays. Or Netflix should do productions of them. Like, I mean, Criterion has been very supportive of Andre and kind of an extension of their work and a mass distributor. I know that's how I saw, My Dinner with Andre, right? I think I may have seen it before Criterion put it out, but, they put out that box set and shit, so there's some popular... Criterion is, like, in a lot of people's households. Maybe that's a more esoteric choice, but, like, you go to Chicago, you go to fucking Denver. That was the other, so what's her, Elisa Gabbard, who's kind of a notable essayist and poet. She wrote an entire book called, I think, The Judy Poems, which is all about... she would do readings and workshops and rehearsals of The Designated Murder with, like, her friends in Denver. And she wrote these poems kind of when she would play Judy. And they just do it, like, amongst themselves. And she wrote these poems that were sort of in the character of the Judy. And so, like I said, I think there's awareness of Wallace Shawn. Maybe in the 90s or something, he was maybe more of a fringe unknown. But now I think he's kind of like a household name. They're no longer like a cult. But revisit the early plays. Arle Knight, that should be done more. I'm going to reread the early ones. Somebody should do the hotel play. Maybe somebody did. I think probably they did it in Austin or something. Theater fucking nerds. There isn't really an equivalent for poetry that as really. There's not like psychotic poetry. I'm the psychotic poetry nerd. I'm the theater nerd. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do here, basically. The Designated Mourner. The Fever. Rehumanizing, de-automatizing the listener. Providing ancient sacred ritual around the fire. That's basically what I feel like they're doing. That's what Andre and Wally do. They're just like, they're the shaman. Putting on the show in our celebrity, extremely wealth unequal society. We need these ultra rich scions of the ultimate privilege and wealth to lecture us pedantically about our society's ills and our own personal unethical lifestyles. I enjoy it. It's what we all enjoy. The guilt has gotten more and the shame has gotten more kinky. But it's basically the same message. We should feel bad about being overeducated, being privileged enough to be in theater, to be poets, to be... But I don't know. I'm poor and I'm working class. And it was easy to identify with him because his work is kind of about that. Even his status as an actor, it's like he's just lucky. And he does work. He's a working actor. That's how he makes his living. His plays and shit, that's what he does for himself and as an artist and as a person. So I could really relate to that, of course, too. That's how I kind of saw my career going. Maybe. If I could get... So I make a living as an actor, and that will finance my private literature, like Wallace Shawn, and even get an audience to come in, you know? So I hope to meet him. I'd love to have a cup of coffee. Talk more in depth. I'd like to really get specific. Supposedly he's friends with Terrence Malick in college. They went to Harvard. They were like friends in Harvard. Supposedly the character Jack Nicholson plays in The King of Marvin Gardens is based on Wallace Shawn. There's just shit. There's just stuff I'd like to talk about. Plays. I'd love to hear his opinion. What Spalding Gray? What's his relationship with that? What's his relationship with poetry? Let's talk about poetry. Let's talk about Ashbery. Let's talk about, I don't know. Like I said, Ted Bergen, Frank O'Hara. Does he know about Burnett Mayer? You know, being sort of a Soho downtown avant-gardist. Does he know about Ted Greenwald? Does he know about... And if not, why not? All right, well, good night, everybody. Sleep tight. Happy June 27th.